the radio conversion piece. So Spotify is clearly trying to gain some intelligence into how they can get broadcast radio content in podcast form and basically be able to convert that to something that they can monetize on Spotify.
Hey gang, it's Tuesday, March 1st. Peter and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, the eMarketer podcast made possible by Mountain. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by one of our senior forecasting analysts. He goes by Peter Vahle.
Happy to be here, Marcus.
Hey chap, thanks for hanging out. Today's fact: who invented champagne? Well, us, apparently. Not you, America. Talking about the English people. In the 16th century, we imported barrels of green flat wine from Champagne, adding sugar and molasses to start it fermenting. We also developed the bottles and the corks to contain it. The French later added some of their flair and began exporting it, mainly to the UK. The French monk, Dom Perignon, this is true, I'm not making this up, that was his name, is often credited with inventing champagne in 1697. It reports the BBC, but 30 years earlier, an English scientist discovered winemakers in England. So we slightly beat you, France. Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm not sorry. So you're welcome for champagne, world. Champagne drinker, Peter?
On special occasions.
When was the last time you popped a bottle?
Probably New Year's Eve. We're not that far from that, so I think that was the last time, and I guess now I have to think about the next special occasion when I can have some.
Should have been being on this show, but whatever, that's fine.
Interesting. I mean, maybe you could send the winner of the Game of the Week, that Friday show. The winner could get a nice bottle of champagne.
How much money do you think this podcast has, Peter? Shipping out champagne to winners. It's hard enough getting a championship belt once, which we don't use anymore.
But think about how much better our answers would be, if we were...
You might actually take it seriously if there's alcohol to win. Yeah, that's fair.
We'd prepare.
I'll speak to Stuart, see what he can do for us.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it'd probably just be like, maybe swing an orange juice. Yeah, let's not get too carried away. Anyway, today's real topic, Spotify's record numbers and also some controversy. Peter, we're talking about Spotify today, as the title suggests. We're going to talk all about how their Q4 went, how their 2021 performed. And then we'll look at how the whole Joe Rogan situation is playing out, whether that's going to be a big deal. And finally, we'll end talking about some more companies they decided to buy, because apparently Spotify can't help themselves. So how did they do in Q4? Well, Peter, let's talk users first. Spotify broke the 400 million mark, registering 406 million total monthly active users by the end of last year. They added 25 million extra from Q3 to Q4. They did the same in 2020. So added the same number in Q4 2020 as they did Q4 2021, 25 million, pushes them over the 400 million mark. In terms of how they're split, you've got ad-supported folks and premium folks. Ad-supported folks who don't pay anything and they get ads, and then the premium folks who pay something and get no ads. So close to 60%, 60 of those subscribers, total subscribers, those 406 are ad-supported folks. Spotify added 16 million of those in Q4, reaching 236 million of the ad-supported people. Premium subscribers, the other 40% of people, they added half as many, 8 million, to reach 180 million. So ad-supported folks, 236, premium, 180, total 406. Peter, initial reactions to their user figures?
A couple thoughts. So they've been able to continue growing premium subscribers. In Q4, that was 16% year over year, which is pretty impressive. You mentioned it's about 40% of overall monthly active users, and they're able to keep attracting paying users. And that's really impressive. And the reason that's important is because premium revenue is still where Spotify makes a majority of its money. So if they're still adding premium subscribers, at double-digit rates, that's really good. They passed the 400 million monthly active user mark, That's also another huge milestone for them. They are the global leader in digital audio. There's really no question, and there hasn't been a question about their place as market leader for a while. And then in terms of looking at ad-supported listeners, 20% growth year over year. And a lot of that is coming from international markets. And a lot of that is also coming from podcast listeners. The majority of podcast listeners are ad-supported. They are not paying any sort of podcast subscription fee, even though now Spotify does offer that. But, a lot of people that just come and they only listen to podcasts, they're not paying anything. So that boosts the ad-supported figures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about the money they made, because you're right, most of their revenue is coming from premium subscribers. So Spotify made close to $2.7 billion in Q4. That's up 24%. Most of that, as Peter pointed out, 85% comes from premium subscribers, even though they make up 40% of the total subscribers. In terms of people, they make up 85% of the revenue coming from premium subscribers. That's up 22%. The remaining 15% of Spotify's revenue comes from ads. That was up a healthy 40%. Peter, the two things that stood out to me: one, full year total revenue, nearly $10 billion. That's up 23%. So from 2020 to 2021, all the money Spotify made was up 23%, nearly $10 billion. And then also full year ad-supported revenue, the share that they make from ads went up as well. The growth of full year ad-supported revenue was up 60%, 2020 to 2021. So that's impressive. But then on top of that, the share of money that they get from ad-supported folks versus premium, the ad-supported share went from 9.5% 2020 to 12.5% in 2021. Do you see that continuing to climb in terms of Spotify's reliance more so on the ad side of things than the premium side?
Yeah, that will definitely continue to increase. And we see the executives at Spotify mention that frequently in their earnings calls. Basically that, they expect that ad revenue piece to keep climbing as a share of overall revenue. And in Q4 2021, that was up to 15%. So over-indexed in Q4, and quarter over quarter, we're seeing ad revenue make up a bigger and bigger share as podcasts become a more central part of their business strategy, and they add ad-supported listeners at a faster rate. So, we don't know exactly what the ceiling is, but we expect, that ad revenue share to get up, past 20% pretty soon, especially in the US,
Wow.
which skews more towards the ad side.
Wow, fascinating. Let's talk about their users for a second, because our colleague, insider intelligence analyst Daniel Konstantinovich, wrote, Spotify is struggling to attract younger listeners. This was at the end of January. And he says that podcasts simply haven't caught on with Gen Z listeners the way they have with millennials. In 2022, he says that we expect nearly 30 million Americans between the ages of 25 to 34, 30 million of them, will be podcast listeners. That's versus 20 million in the age group below, the 18 to 24 folks. So from 30 in the higher one, 20 million in the lower one. And then the listening audience among 12 to 17-year-olds, the one below that, is even smaller at 10 million. So 12 to 17-year-olds, 10 million listeners to podcasts, 18 to 24-year-olds, 20 million listeners, 25 to 34-year-olds, 30 million listeners. Peter, Daniel's theory about Spotify struggling to attract younger listeners, big deal, medium deal, no deal at all?
The way I look at it is by penetration rate for the different age groups. And the two most penetrated age groups are 18 to 24 and 25 to 34. Both have over 60% of the population listening to podcasts on a monthly basis. So that's pretty high. That's over 6 in 10 people. And that 18 to 34 age group is extremely valuable for advertisers and for any business that has that audience sort of consistently interacting with their content. So the 0 to 17 age group is definitely less penetrated. But when we think about podcasts, they largely were popularized as something you listen to during your commute. Usually that is for people who are of working age, who maybe are in college. So a lot of the content that you see for podcasts is geared towards a slightly older audience. We
Absolutely.
So that's really why I don't see it as much of an issue. Those younger generations or younger people are going to move into that 18 to 34 age group, and our expectation is they will adopt podcasts similarly to what we're currently seeing.
Yeah, we spoke about this relatively recently that, podcast content will start to be more, the companies will start to focus more on podcast content for kids because there is a market there. And there are some listeners there, even though they don't have the same penetration rates as the older folks. Peter, we got to talk about Joe Rogan, came up in the headlines a ton in the last month or so. Ashley Carman of The Verge notes Joe Rogan spurred multiple musicians to pull their discographies from Spotify over his show, Joe Rogan's show, spreading misinformation. Big, medium, or little deal?
This falls somewhere between little to medium deal. And I say that thinking about Spotify's business. I don't say that in terms of it's a little deal that there's vaccine and COVID misinformation out there, right? Mm-hmm. So just speaking about this from a Spotify business perspective, I think it's towards the smaller end of the scale. And that's really because we don't see this affecting their monthly active listeners substantially. There could be some volatility early in the year. We'll see what their reporting is for Q1 listeners. If there's any significant dip, I've heard anecdotally that people have moved to Apple Podcasts. So, in a bit of a boycott. So if that does turn out to be a substantial amount of listeners who are boycotting Spotify because of Joe Rogan being an exclusive contributor there, then that could move things a little bit. It's kind of hard to say without any hard numbers from Spotify. Yeah. But I will just say that we did not make any significant changes to our US listener forecast. We expect things to move around a bit, but also there will probably be some people who hear this news and they go on to Spotify because they appreciate the stance of keeping Joe Rogan on, and right. All publicity is good publicity. There will be some of that where people actually move on and listen to him on Spotify. So any politics or any personal vaccine opinions aside, our stance right now is that it's not going to have a huge impact on Spotify.
Yeah, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek, he noted that it's too early to know whether the Rogan-spurred cancellations would represent a substantial problem. He went on to say that we're trying to balance creative expression with the safety of our users. And of course, this is a very complicated issue, and pointed to the company's promise to roll out COVID-19 disclaimers on any podcast episode that discusses the virus and have a public rollout of its content moderation policies. Jeremy Goldman, our eMarketer briefing director, he said that hashtag cancel Spotify was trending on Twitter recently, but most advertisers not currently pulling their Spotify ad spending or speaking out on the issue. I want to read a quick passage from The Economist because I think they made a really good point, Peter, of how this kind of rolls up into a larger issue. The Economist saying, quote, whereas most social networks publish regular reports on what content they remove, the audio platforms are mute on the subject. Amid Rogan Gate, Spotify revealed it had deleted 20,000 podcast episodes over COVID misinformation. The rest is guesswork. Facebook employs 15,000 content moderators. How many work for the audio streamers? None, we'll say. But insiders suggest the answer is not many. Then they cite Evelyn Douek, Harvard law professor, saying it's always been baffling to her how podcasts have flown under the content moderation radar. It's a massive blind spot. And then the article continues, it could also prove to be a pricey one. As audio platforms host more user-generated content, the moderation task will expand. It will probably involve lots of human moderators automating the process with AI, as Facebook and others are doing. And it's even harder for audio than it is for text, images, or video. And Peter, the problem just continuing to balloon. Spotify said they have 3.6 million podcasts available on their service. That's up from 3.2 million the previous quarter. So this seems like it's something that's really bubbling up. And unless the platforms try to put a lid on this, it could be a real problem. Even if they can, I don't know if there's a lid big enough.
Yeah, we're seeing that all of the big platforms with large audiences have been running into this problem. And it reminds me a bit of the earlier days of YouTube, where there was a lot of questionable content, a lot of objectionable content on YouTube, and there were advertiser boycotts, and people pulled spend from YouTube because of it. And then they've addressed some of those issues. They've taken out content, they've added moderators. So I think that this kind of comes with the growth territory for a business like this. And as they've ramped up so quickly, they're going to have to now play catch up in terms of moderating what's on their platform. Finally, Peter, Spotify's been shopping again. They acquired Ushka, which is just fun to say, in Q4. Peter, who are Ushka, and why does this acquisition matter? This is a really interesting one. Ushka is an Australian podcast hosting, distributing, monetizing platform. And their specialty really is converting broadcast radio into podcast content. And I think that this acquisition flew under the radar a little bit, especially, I guess, just kind of by nature, since there's been so many acquisitions by Spotify recently. But, a couple of things that I want to call out about the things that interest me from this acquisition. The radio conversion piece. So Spotify is clearly trying to gain some intelligence into how they can get broadcast radio content in podcast form and basically be able to convert that to something that they can monetize on Spotify. That really hasn't been done at scale yet. There's some shows here and there that are now on Spotify as podcasts, but in terms of really automating that and making it seamless, this acquisition is going to help them move towards that. The other thing that stands out is what Ushka does with internal communications, sort of creating private podcasts. That's one of the things that their technology is designed to do. And what they call out on their website are a couple things. Business to employees is one of them. So allowing businesses to, quote, securely distribute and measure podcasts for internal communications, employee onboarding, sales enablement, HR, and training. Really interesting. So that's a very
really
niche
smart
case we don't usually talk about, right? And then the other sort of private podcast space is education. So having a private closed group of people who you can communicate with through podcasts and through audio, and basically engaging an entire school community privately is how they talk about it on their site. So I thought those are two really interesting places of innovation that Spotify could go if they decide that, it's worth it.
Yeah, fascinating to see how that's going to develop. Spotify also bought a couple more podcasting companies. They're going to acquire both Chartable and Podsights, two prominent podcast marketing and ad attribution companies. The deal price hasn't been disclosed, but Peter, that adds to the list of other podcast-related companies Spotify has gobbled up: Ushka, Pods, Findaway, Locker Room, Megaphone, Gimlet, Parcast, and The Ringer. Some would say they have a problem, but maybe they don't. Maybe they know what they're up to. We'll see if it all comes together, has so far. Peter, that's all we've got time for the lead. It's time now for the halftime report. Peter, we talked about a lot. One takeaway from yourself from the first half, please. And also if you could give Spotify a grade for their Q4/2021 performance.
The thing that stood out to me the most is that 406 million number. So Spotify now has over 400 million global monthly active users. That's a huge number, and they expect that to keep growing. The other thing that really stands out is ad-supported revenue making up 15% of overall revenue in Q4. That's a new record in terms of ads share of their business. And again, because of all of their focus in podcasting, they're really pushing for that ad revenue piece to be a bigger and bigger part of their overall revenue moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Grade for Spotify? An A? B?
I'd give them an A minus.
An A minus seems fair. All right, time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, Mountain. Mountain is turning connected TV into performance TV. Their marketing software solution gives advertisers everything they need to quickly and easily launch connected TV campaigns that are fully optimized to achieve specific marketing goals. From conversions and revenue to website visits and more, Mountain Performance TV is tailor-made to treat television as a performance ad channel, just like paid search and social. Visit mountain.com today to learn more and discover the impact it can have for your brand. All right, folks, we are back today in other news. SXM Media debuts its audio ID, and who's most likely to be Spotify's rival in the world of podcasts? Story 1. SMX Media wants to improve the audio advertising experience, writes Insider Intelligence analyst Rachel Wolf. She notes that SXM Media, who are responsible for ad inventory across Pandora, SiriusXM, and Stitcher, debuted Audio ID, an identifier that lets advertisers recognize users across channels and improve advertising accuracy. Ms. Wolf explains that audio IDs are based on various listener signals, logins or mobile ad IDs, to identify individuals. Every person's is unique and can't be traced back to them. Peter, the new audio ID from SMX Media will blank.
will improve the company's monetization. But I still don't think it's enough to revitalize Pandora's business, which accounts for almost a quarter of SiriusXM's revenue. And again, Pandora is a business segment within SiriusXM focused on, their digital native products. Pandora has always been monetized pretty well. They grew ad revenues 30% in 2021, but its problem is that it has been losing listeners year over year. That's really the big problem. And in the press release for this, it said that Audio ID's US-based identity launch offering will live within the walls of SXM Media. So my response to that is that relying on improved monetization for owned and operated properties isn't enough when you're seeing significant declines in listeners. And according to our latest forecast, Pandora listeners fell 11% last year and will fall another 7% this year. So to me, that's the larger problem for the company. But I will say there are parts of SiriusXM's business that are doing really well. Their satellite radio business, including the digital app, and also its AdsWiz audio technology business. So in order for the company to see significant long-term benefits from this new Audio ID, they'll have to double down on the growth areas, which are radio, podcasts, and off-platform, and figure out a way to deal with losing listeners at Pandora.
Story 2. eMarketer Briefing Director Jeremy Goldman notes that Spotify is entering a new phase in its existence, one in which mainstream investors and marketers understand its fortunes rely far more on podcasts than music streaming. But Jeremy also notes that Spotify's podcasting refocus hasn't gone unnoticed from competitors like Amazon Music, who are playing the exclusivity game in a number of ways. Number one, Amazon Music just said that they would exclusively distribute the popular How I Built This podcast 1 week before other platforms beginning next month. Number 2, Exactly Right Media's podcast lineup, which includes My Favorite Murder, a top 10 podcast according to Edison Research, will be available a week early on Amazon Music. Number 3, paying $80 million for the Smartless podcast from Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett. So they're all moves that Amazon Music are making. But Peter, the real threat to Spotify's podcasting dominance is/will be blank.
Potentially Apple.
Tell me why.
The only reason I don't say Apple is because there is a big if, and that if is whether or not Apple decides to put significant resources into podcasting. If they do not, then, Apple will be the second most listened to podcast platform, and they will, have people listening, but they will never really be able to compete with Spotify. So it depends how much Apple really commits to the podcasting business. It does seem a little bit unlikely at this point for a couple reasons. The first is that they've gotten so far behind Spotify in terms of monetizing podcasts. We just talked about all of the different acquisitions that Spotify's made to content and, for the technology stack. And also, it seems like Apple's ambitions remain subscription-based. Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, which is only subscription-based, Apple Arcade, all of these subscription services don't really suggest that Apple wants to go the route of advertisements. And because they don't want to go the route of advertisements, they're not going to ever make significant money from podcasts. That being said, they will be the biggest threat if they ever decide that they do want to invest more in the ad space.
And that is all we have time for. Thank you so much, Peter, for hanging out.
Thanks, Marcus.
And thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. And thanks to everyone listening. Tune in tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Mountain.